Hi, I'm Victor Miller. I wrote Friday the 13th, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Hi, you're listening to episode 8 of GenreTainment. We're your hosts, Marx
and Julie, and we're here to give you news about our favorite genre on TV, movies, web series, and everything in between.
We also have interviews. We have 2 this time. The first one is with Erin Way, the newest cast member of SyFy Channel's Alphas. She made her first appearance on the show yesterday.
Our second interview is with the New York Times best-selling author RA Salvatore about his Forgotten Realms books, Charon's Claw, which is available at bookstores starting today. He talks about his love of fantasy and how he created the famous fantasy character Drizzt. We also ask him why he killed an iconic Star Wars character in the book Spectre Prime.
Now, Way tells us a little bit about her new character and the work it took to play a superhuman character that can actually learn any skill.
And what you just heard at the beginning of our show was a snippet from the theme song for our web series, Reality on Demand. It was a song composed and performed by our friend Tishan Hardy, and you can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com.
Now, before we start the interviews, or the first interview, we do have some news, hot off the virtual presses. First up,
preparing to start its 8th season, some may say that the CW's Supernatural is past its prime. Well, new showrunner Jeremy Carver would actually agree, but he says he has a plan to fix that. Yes, and what he calls a semi-reboot of the series this season. Carver was with the show during its early run, but left to work on SyFy's Being Human, the American version, a few years ago. He said that he wants to get back to the more straightforward tales that worked so well for Supernatural in the past. Carver told TV Line he felt the show got too buried in its own mythology. And here is a quote. The one thing that struck me while watching season 7 was I felt like the show got a little bit buried under its mythology. It became a little hard to tell exactly what was going on at times. The longtime fans all deserve intricate plot, but it felt a little burdensome. Resetting our mythology was one idea that I tried to bring into the show. And Carver said we'll be meeting a more mature Winchester brothers next year. He goes on, part of this season is realizing they didn't just spend several years together, they really matured in different ways. It's one thing to get in a car with your brother in year 1, but 8 years later, you've both matured and grown. You're both changing and trying to find out who you are. There's a lot of that type of exploration for these guys this year. So what do you think? Did you like the recent Leviathan story arc, or do you feel that Supernatural needs a mini reboot? I think it needs a mini reboot. I think that the last couple of years, season 6 seemed completely directionless, and then Eve was set up to be the big bad, but just was dispatched early on, and it just sort of wandered and pathless.
It seemed to lose its way.
And the Leviathans, I was so excited. I thought they were going to go kind of creepy Cthulhu-like, and I think that I'm a huge Supernatural fan, but I felt like the Leviathans were just too silly to even be.
They felt
scary.
more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
No, Buffy actually had scarier, more serious. So I don't know. I mean, I think that maybe.
It felt like Buffy the Vampire Slayer bad guys from a one-shot episode.
Yeah, but they stretched them out so long. And this is certainly one of those shows where you can't have a strong show without a strong big bad, you know. I mean, to be fair, it was hard to top Lucifer, Satan. But yeah, so I'm excited. Jeremy Carver has written some really great, iconic episodes. One of the big favorites, I think he wrote Mystery Spot and Wishing Well. So he certainly has a good handle on the characters. So hopefully that can get it back on track, because I do love me some Supernatural.
And Ian, who's in the chat room, said that they remind him of like the Ori on Stargate, how they were kind of weaker villains.
I didn't really like the Ori on.
The Leviathans in a way are kind of like a variation on the demons in Supernatural.
Yeah.
They're kind of less scary.
They were. So hopefully we can get a good big bad. I like the idea of a little bit. They have been maturing, the Winchester brothers, over time. Obviously, the actors have grown over 8 years as well. So, okay, enough of that. I'm just really excited.
This is a Supernatural show now.
I could do an entire show on Supernatural, no problem.
Okay, so it hasn't aired yet, but the upcoming superhero series, Arrow, could manage to do something that fellow CW show, Smallville, couldn't do in its entire 10-year run, and that's show Batman on the small screen.
Oh, that would be great.
Arrow producer Mark Guggenheim. I always have an issue with his last name. Told this to IGN when asked if Oliver Queen, a.k.a. Green Arrow, would have any superhero help in DC Universe. I would say probably. One of the things we want to do is row the show out at the right pace. For the most part, I think we've taken the philosophy that things are happening sooner rather than later. I always feel like every time we get the note from the network, is this happening too soon? I feel like we're on the right track. I know as a viewer myself, I'm impatient. I want to see stuff. We're not going to make the audience wait to see characters, plot twists, revelations. I think running out of great characters and great moments is a quality problem to have, and I just want to have them. So when pressed on who could possibly guest star, he did say that the end of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight film trilogy could free up Bruce Wayne for a trip to Arrow's home turf. As you may or may not know, the producers of Smallville did try and fail to bring Batman to their show.
I know.
Yeah, I believe that one character that was really weird. That
was trying to be.
Yeah, there's a character that introduced that some people thought was going to be Batman. I think he was originally supposed to be, and he wasn't, and it was a big letdown. Yeah. But anyway, they were always stopped by the powers that be because of their fear that it could confuse fans of the film series.
How stupid do they think we are?
But now that the film series is done, they hope to be able to use Batman. Quote, "Oh, my hope is that we can use him at some point. I think that plagued the Smallville showrunners more than it plagues us because obviously the Dark Knight trilogy is over. They're not available to us yet. My hope is that they'll be available to us at some point. That would be awesome. No question, that would be absolutely awesome. But I don't know. That's above my pay grade." So what do you think? Should Batman pop up in a future episode of Arrow?
I think it is. I don't understand where they think it would be confusing. I mean, I don't think anyone truly believes Christian Bale is Batman and therefore would be just horribly confused that he doesn't show up on this whole
He is really Batman. Santa Claus is real.
Oh,
Santa Claus is Batman.
Ooh, cool. That's how he gets down the chimney.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also they seem to. You can juggle. They've managed to juggle different animated series and different universes within comic books all at the same time. I think they need to stop assuming that we're all too stupid to follow the different things. So anyway, speaking of Batman, did you wonder what the real origin story of Bane is in The Dark Knight Rises? The film's costume designer told GQ it was filmed, but it didn't make the final cut. One thing that's been consistent about all three of director Christopher Nolan's Batman movies is the lack of a fully detailed origin story for his primary villains. Ra's al Ghul, the Joker, and Bane all have backstories ranging from murky to non-existent, and we think we're seeing Bane's origin at one point.
Oh, spoiler.
Oh, sorry. But it's not necessarily.
Or is it? They haven't watched it yet. I don't know. It's been weeks.
That's true. I assumed everybody in the world had seen it at this point. So anyway, costume designer Lindy Hemmings, who's worked on all three Nolan Batman films, alluded to a prison sequence in The Dark Knight Rises in which we see how much a younger Bane got the injuries we glimpsed in the movie. Quote, "The other thing that you should have seen during that sequence is him being injured in his youth. So one of the fundamental things about his costume is that he has this scar from the back injury. Even if he hasn't got the bulletproof vest on, he still has to wear the waist belt and the braces. And in that scene in the prison where he's learning to fight the same way Batman learned to fight, he's wearing an early version of his waist belt. It's showing support, but it's not the finished one he eventually wears. He's also wearing an early version of his gas mask, all glued together. And when it was clarified that the scene didn't make the final cut, she had this to say, 'Well, that's an awful shame, but I suppose you have to cut things. I won't elaborate on it too much because it isn't in the film, but there was another section that showed you why he had the mask and where it came from. And origin for Bane appears to have been filmed and then dropped. So does Bane work better with a secret origin?'"
Secret origin. He's really Joker's brother.
Don't tell them.
Oops, my bad. All right. M. Night Shyamalan is on a mission to find out if there is life after death. He is teaming up with SyFy Channel to work on his first scripted TV project. The director will be joined behind the scenes by Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Marty Noxon. and with whom he'll co-write and executive produce the show.
I like Marty Noxon.
I do too. And the show is called Proof. Here's the official synopsis for Proof. After the tragic accident and sudden death of his parents, the son of a billionaire tech genius offers a large reward for anyone who can find proof of life after death. I kind of wonder where it goes from there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know he's kind of taken his fair share of bad rap lately, but I like M. Night Shyamalan, and I do like that he's not afraid to delve into things like religion and spirituality and the effects of things, everything from aliens to environmental issues on the human condition. So, yeah, I mean, I like the idea that, he's not afraid to go for it. So, even if he falls short, at least he got out there and gave it a shot. I admire that.
Yeah, I think he's one of my favorite directors. I think he just got kind of stuck in a gimmick that people were always expecting, and he couldn't live up to it, a shock ending.
But on a technical level, I mean, if you watch his directing, I mean, even if there are issues with plots and it may not be your thing, you have to admit that he is a very technically good director, and he manages to put out good quality shots consistently, I think.
So, well, before Marvel decided to get into the movie-making game themselves, boy, have they gotten into the game, right? They sold rights to different characters to different studios, which is why you probably won't see Spider-Man or the X-Men in the Avengers universe anytime soon.
Of course not.
But now, thanks to a new deal, a very possible deal, tied to Fox and Daredevil, one of the biggest Marvel Universe baddies, Galactus, could return to Marvel. Now, Fox owns the film rights to Daredevil and also the Fantastic Four. But if they don't start filming a sequel or reboot of Daredevil by October 10th, the rights revert back to Marvel. Now, Fox currently is in talks with Joe Carnahan to put together a Frank Miller-esque, hardcore 70s thriller version of Daredevil. So Fox doesn't really want to lose those Daredevil rights. So they're wanting to cut a deal with Marvel. But Marvel wants to, wants something in return. And what they want in return is the Marvel Universe villain Galactus and his herald, the Silver Surfer. You may remember them, or versions of them, in the most recent Fantastic Four movie. Now, sorry, Fantastic Four isn't part of the proposed deal because apparently there's a reboot in the works by Chronicles' Josh Trank to make a brand new Fantastic Four movie. So what do you think? You want to see the Avengers take on Galactus after they take on Thanos?
Why not?
Yeah, so hopefully, the Planet Eater Galactus, he's probably the only guy that's more powerful than Thanos.
I wonder how you're going to show someone eating a planet on film.
It's easy.
I guess she's pretty much can do anything on film now. I mean, does he take multiple bites? Can he swallow it whole?
He usually uses some kind of device that breaks up the earth.
Yeah, but I just don't know what they're going to do.
I don't know. The Galactus in the Fantastic Four movie was very different. And kind of.
That's what I mean. With the creative liberties that it's a wonder.
They do a great job. So now we haven't heard much about Bryan Singer's planned Battlestar Galactica film since it was announced way back when. That is until now.
Woohoo.
Singer spoke a little bit about his planned big screen reboot of the SyFy franchise to IGN. He quote, "I have a script that's in revisions right now, and it's very cool," Bryan Singer said about the John Orloff's script. "It will exist, I think, quite well between the Glenn Larson and Ron Moore universes. But that's all I want to say about it." He also said, "But it's evolving quite well and quite recently. I've been developing this for a while, and I hope to do it. It just kind of ends right there.
He likes to get to the point.
Yes. Well, I don't know how I feel about big screen Battlestar Galactica so soon after Ron Moore's film.
I would be more excited about it being a continuation of the Ron Moore.
I don't know how you would continue it, though.
I don't know either. But I just really liked it. So, I don't know.
Okay, well, speaking of Marvel, how about X-Men First Class, the sequel? I know we really enjoyed that movie.
That was very good.
Now, Bryan Singer also announced last week the follow-up to last year's First Class. It's going to be called X-Men Days of Future Past. Comic book fans may recognize the title from an iconic story arc that was by the same name, which alternates between present and future, where the X-Men go to overturn Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and now mutants are forced to live in camps, and it's up to the present-day X-Men to prevent this timeline from occurring. Basically, this is what Singer said. I can say it's being written right now, and it will start shooting in a few months. It's going to be very ambitious. It's called Days of Future Past, and it deals with aspects of that comic, but also some very new things. I just don't want to give any of it away. Matthew Vaughn will be directing, and I'm totally excited about it. Now, of course, just because it uses the title of that story arc doesn't mean it's going to be exactly like it. So, but boy, does it open up possibilities. I don't know. I want Wolverine. Let's put Wolverine back in there.
You know, I did not have high hopes for X-Men First Class before we saw it, but I was just blown away by it. I really thought it was absolutely fantastic, well directed, well acted, well cast, well written. It was I think that they really could have promoted it more heavily than they did.
Yeah, I mean the third X-Men movie kind of wasn't so great.
No, this blew that one out of the
So I really wasn't expecting a whole lot, but boy, it was really great. It was a good time period film, and
yeah.
All right, well enough about us, enough news.
Yeah, who cares what we think about anything?
We got 2 interviews to get through, so let's get through the first one. So now it's time for our first interview. So here's an excerpt from an interview with Alpha's newest cast member, Erin Way. It was a fun little chat, and here we go.
Ben thinks he's a tough guy.
Trust me, short stack, he is.
He's gonna get his ass kicked.
All right.
What's the problem, old man? Some of the bitches all over the place. I can't hit them.
You see that dude? He messes with your eyes. Like a camera flash going off in your face. Makes you see all double and triple.
How does he do that?
He's got a special talent. All the fighters do. They're alphas. I play the character of Kat, and she meets Harkin at I guess Harkin and Hicks both at an underground alpha fight club. And her special ability is that she can basically learn any skill instantly. So that includes knowledge and muscle memory. It's essentially kind of like she can just download it almost instantly. And the only downside is that she has a bit of a memory problem. So after about a month or so, she starts losing memories of the past. So while she retains her memory, she can't remember how she learned them or who she knows or where she came from, which, you know, is a little problematic. She's a very, very strong female character, which I not only enjoy watching, but I enjoy playing. You know, she can fight, she's tough, and I think that's it's a cool thing that SyFy tends to do for females in general, is that they tend to have really strong female characters. So that intrigued me, and then also just the fact that I would be learning a new skill on a weekly basis was kind of cool, you know, and I basically would have a new ability each on a very regular basis, which I just found, I was like, well, I'm never going to get bored with this girl.
I was wondering if you're a fan of SyFy, and how does acting in a SyFy show like Alpha differ from the more quote-unquote normal shows like Detroit 187 or Private Practice that you've acted in?
I'm a huge fan of SyFy. Never done a SyFy show or movie before, so it was kind of a surreal experience. But I'm a huge I mean, you can kind of name the SyFy shows, and I'm a huge sucker for them. So that was kind of awesome. That I had to pinch myself on a couple occasions that I was going to, you know, be a part of that genre finally. It was really cool. It would kind of go without saying. I'm so cliche, but I'm a huge Buffy and Firefly and Dollhouse and so Josh Whedon for sure. I basically, any show that he does, I don't even doubt that I'm going to like it because I just know that I will. While I love the other genres that I've been a part of, Private Practice and Detroit 187 I mean, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's like comparing apples and oranges because there is definitely the procedural element a little bit in there with Alphas, which makes Alphas a little different in that we are trying to solve not necessarily crimes, but, we're trying to figure out what's behind incidents that are unexplained. So in that way, it's a little bit like a crime drama, like Detroit 187. But the world of SyFy is so much bigger, and the possibilities of what can happen and what people are capable of is, because it's SyFy, it doesn't have to be based in quote-unquote reality. So that, to me, is what's so exciting, is that the imagination and the scope of what can occur is huge. And because of that, it really is an exciting genre to be in. And so you kind of look forward to getting that script and being like, okay, what else are they going to stumble upon this week? And, and what is their ability going to be? Because it's probably going to be something that you've never even thought of. And so that, to me, is what's so exciting about this genre and makes my job really fun and never boring and interesting each week.
Okay. And how did it feel like being the new person in this cast? They're coming in the very beginning of season 2. Did they welcome you quite well? Was it easy to fit in?
Oh, they're so mean. No, no, they were great. They were just, it could be like the freshman at high school that gets picked on, and they had no obligation necessarily to treat me nicely, and they were all just bent over backwards to make me feel welcome. And by the end of that first episode, I felt like I was part of a huge family. And I think they all had their own perspective on the exciting thing that Kat was going to bring to the team dynamic. So I've been very blessed on both shows that I've worked on for a period of time, Detroit 187 and this one, to be surrounded by a group of actors that get along really well and that have that kind of a collaborative team mentality towards doing the show. So it's a team. It's a team of people that want to get along, want to make the show good, so no, I felt nothing but goodwill and just this warmth when I came on board. It was a big relief because there was a lot to take on my first episode. So had I been intimidated by the cast members, it would have been an extra kind of fear to kind of deal with. But they just made me feel like super, super comfortable, which was nice.
I was curious how you auditioned for this character, because your character's supposed to have all these different skills. Was it just dialogue and seeing about your personality, or did they throw any kind of curveballs at you to test like how quickly you can learn physical skills?
No, they did not, thank God, test me on any kind of physical skills. In the audition, basically description of the character, it did have, as it said, I think it was martial arts background a plus, but they clearly did not make that a necessity because I don't have any martial arts background. I have dance background, which probably helps a little bit because I'm not completely physically retarded. So I'm at least coordinated. But no, that was not in the audition process at all. It was all dialogue, and over a series of, I think, 4 auditions total. I auditioned for the part 4 times, and then once I got it, then they were like, oh, and P.S., your first episode, you need to be an expert at kickboxing. And I was like, awesome. So at that point, it was like, boy, we hope you're a quick learner, because here you go. And I had about a week. They moved me here to Toronto, and then I had about a week of training before starting on my first episode. So, they just trusted that I would be able to be a quick study, which is a lot of pressure. I'm not going to lie to you. But luckily it turned out okay. I think it all looks okay and good in the episode. So that's good.
So you think your ballerina background helps you? Because we talked about Summer earlier, and she's got the same kind of background. And she, of course, did a fantastic job in Firefly and Serenity, especially Serenity. Were you able to use that training, like to develop the beats, like of dancing to the fight?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the sense that it's a little twofold. One, it's completely counterintuitive to how a dancer moves and holds their body. So that's the first thing that I found is like where the center of balance is and how a boxer holds their body is pretty much polar opposite of a dancer. However, what did come in handy was, was the coordination factor, the fact that I'm relatively coordinated with my body and relatively flexible still, which helps with the kicking and things of that sort. And then also, when you do a show like this, when you do fight scenes, they're choreographed. And you usually have about not very long. They usually teach you the choreography for the fight maybe the day before, often the same day. So the ability to learn choreography very quickly is really the key, actually, that I think came in most handy. Is I'm used to learning a dance, learning dance moves, learning a dance really fast. And so that's basically what you have to do when you come on set and have to fight. So that's really, I think, where it really came into handy. Otherwise, it was pretty much a retraining of my body of, like, how to hold myself and not look like a sissy. Dancers don't look like fighters. So I had to kind of retrain myself not to hold myself like a ballerina. So it did come in handy a little bit, for sure, in the important areas, I guess.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Great. Thank you.
Like me. And thank you to Erin Way for agreeing to the interview. And you can check out Alphas every Monday on the SyFy channel.
Yeah, and Ian in the chat room actually pointed out some news that we just happened almost a few hours ago. That Joss Whedon, it's been announced that Joss Whedon is developing a live-action Marvel TV series for ABC. It's going to be tied into the Avengers. So,
speaking of the devil, Joss Whedon,
yeah.
And we love him.
So I'm looking forward to that. There's no word yet on how it ties, except there'll be different characters. Obviously, not going to get some of those movie actors to appear.
No, but if you've got Joss Whedon, that's really all you need.
And you have a tie-in on the DVD, so it's makes sense that they might do a tie-in for a TV series.
They might be testing out some characters as well and seeing how that works with audiences would be my guess.
And maybe.
Wouldn't be a bad idea.
All right. Well, now let's move on to our next interview.
Yes.
This one's with New York Times bestselling author RA Salvatore.
Charon's Claw, legendary weapon, sentient sword. It has dominated a once great city and enslaved a once legendary assassin. But can it stop the equally legendary Drizzt Do'Urden?
Well, I'm Bob Salvatore, RA Salvatore, and last month marked a big milestone for me because 25 years ago, last month, July of 1987, I got my first professional writing contract. I had been tasked with writing the second book in TSR's Forgotten Realms, now Wizards of the Coast, but then it was TSR. And so I started writing, and during that I created a character by the name of Drizzt Do'Urden, a Dark Elf, who has caught on, and here I am a quarter century later, still writing about the guy. I've done many other books besides, including a couple of Star Wars books, and my World of Demon Wars, which I love dearly. 11 books in that world and counting. So it's been a heck of a ride. I think I've got about 53 books published now, and many more to come, I hope.
Well, what started you down the path of fantasy writing?
It was a funny thing because, I got to college and I wasn't much of a writer or a reader. When I was younger, I used to read and write all the time, but school kind of beat the interest out of me. And by the time I got to college, I was a math major.
Oh,
well, I was actually undeclared, but everything was math. I was going for math or computer science. And then we had for Christmas, my freshman year in college, this was 1977, my sister gave me a copy of Tolkien's work. 2 months later, we had this incredible snowstorm up here in New England, the blizzard of '78. So here I was, just turned 19 years old, and trapped in my mom's house for a week because there were no roads. You could not leave the house. And, I thought, oh, joy, what am I going to do? And I actually picked up those books and read them, and I went away from that house on this magical journey to Middle-earth with a hobbit named Bilbo. It was incredible. I read those books several times that week, and my love of reading and writing came back. So I went back to school, changed my major so that all of my electives would be literature courses or creative writing courses. And then, but I had this really warm place in my heart for fantasy because of that Tolkien experience and just the escapism. I loved it so much. So I read every fantasy book I could find, and there weren't that many at that time that you could find. There was no internet in 1977, 78. But I read Terry Brooks and Stephen Donaldson and Anne McCaffrey and Michael Moorcock and Fritz Leiber. I was pretty much out at that point. And so I didn't have anything else to read. I wrote one. I wrote my own book in 1983, 84, around there. And when I finished writing it, this book called Echoes of the Fourth Magic, I wasn't planning on being published. I just sent it out, got some horrible rejection letters, and that just made me mad, so I went back to work and rewrote it. And that book actually got me the audition in 1987 to write The Crystal Shard.
Wow. Now, you're most famous for your character, how do you pronounce his name, his full name?
It depends what day you ask me. I never really clarify that. Sometimes I say Drizzt, other times I say Drizzt, and the reason is because I think that's like the coolest marketing twist ever. I picture two kids in a high school hallway. It's Drizzt, it's Drizzt, it's Drizzt, it's Drizzt. Third kid comes over and says, "What the hell are you talking about?" And they go, "You never read these?" And I win. So we'll call him Drizzt for this one.
Very clever, yeah. Well, now that character takes place in the campaign setting of Forgotten Realms from the Dungeons & Dragons games. Were you familiar with Forgotten Realms before you wrote that character? Did you used to play Forgotten Realms before you wrote that character?
No, I was familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, very much so, because this was, like I said, 1987, and I had started playing D&D in 1980, 81, around there, when the first edition Player's Handbook came out, and first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, the first hardcover books, that's when I started playing. But what happened was I had sent my book in, the manuscript for Echoes of the Fourth Magic, and the editor liked it but couldn't publish it because she said they only had room on their schedule for Forgotten Realms books, and could I make that book a Forgotten Realms book? And so I said, well, what are the Forgotten Realms? Because they weren't out yet. Right. So the only people who knew about the realms were the people who worked at TSR. Well, we couldn't set that book in the realms, so they gave me a crash course, and I auditioned and won the audition to do the second book, The Crystal Shard.
Cool. Was it a challenge, and has it been a challenge, writing stories taking place in Forgotten Realms in a shared world? Is it tough to keep track of where everything's at and what's going on?
Oh, it's impossible to keep track, so I don't even try. I keep track of that which is around what I'm doing, and I spend a lot of my time hiding in different corners of the world. But, as much of a challenge as it's been, it's more of a pleasure, because when shared world is working right, you get to stand on the shoulders of giants like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and Ed Greenwood, and the work that's come before. So, for me, the inspiration and the side stories that have cropped up because it is a shared world have helped me make the books thicker and richer and fuller than just coming up with the entire setting, plot, and everything else by myself in a lot of ways, when it works right. When it works wrong, then we have contradictions that nobody was aware of till after all the products are out. Mm-hmm. We try to keep that at a minimum, and that really depends on how well the people at Wizards of the Coast can communicate with all of the different authors, with all of the different game designers, the freelancers, the in-house people. It's that's a tough gig. Working as a coordinator for something like the Forgotten Realms would be one of the toughest jobs I could imagine.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how many books are being made every year for Forgotten Realms in general?
Oh, the numbers gone all over the place. At one point, they were doing more than one a month. like 2-3 books a month, I think, at one point, or some crazy amount. But then other times it's slowed down where they're only doing 6 or 8 a year. But it's not just the books, the game products. I mean, you have modules and game accessories and source books and all the rest of it. And now you've got online material as well with, Dungeons and Dragons Online and the new Neverwinter game coming out and the previous 2 Neverwinter games and Demon's Stone from Atari that came out a few years ago. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and it's a big job for everybody to try to keep track.
Mm-hmm. Now, your main character you're most popular for, Drizzt, he's a dark elf, which is very counterintuitive, what you would expect for a heroic character or race to be in D&D or Forgotten Realms. Why did you choose a dark elf?
I didn't. He chose me. It was off the top of my head. I was under duress on the phone with the editor while I was working as a financial analyst at my day job, and she needed a sidekick for Wolfgar. And off the top of my head, I don't know why, because I'd never played one in the game. We don't even have them in my game, other than as really cool monsters. But I said a black elf. They were called black elves back in the 80s. And, I had to talk her into letting me do it. She said, go ahead, and it was because it was just a sidekick character. And then once I started writing the book, he just kind of took over. Believe me, no one was more surprised than I was to find a dark elf in my books.
Well,
I'm glad that happened, though.
For people who may not be familiar with this character, can you tell us a little bit about the character?
Sure. I think he's the classic romantic hero, and I think one of the reasons he resonates so well, particularly with younger readers, teenagers, is because everybody feels like they're misunderstood, and everybody feels like the outcast at some point in their life. And so here he is, born in this dark elf city, which, by the way, was based on Mario Puzo's work, The Godfather. When I wrote Menzo Berenzan, I based it on the basic societal structures I used as a model, The Godfather, by Mario Puzo. So he's in this world that's really tough and that he just can't stomach. And his internal moral code is just screaming at him that this is wrong. And so, he does some pretty heroic things to be able to escape that society and strike out on his own, even though he thinks it's going to be the end of him. He thinks he won't survive for long without that city around him, and he knows he'll never be really accepted in other places, or believes that anyway. And it's just his journey that we've gone through for these 25 years where he's asking himself all the big questions and trying to do what's right, sometimes against tremendous odds.
Now, sometimes people talk about that character and they say that you're making messages against racial prejudice with the character.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to do things like that. I mean, you're trying to make your books relevant. Mm-hmm. And to me, like, the stupidest thing in the world is racism. I mean, I'm a racist because I'm a human and I have this affinity toward people. The idea that there's a difference between an Italian, a Frenchman, a person from Africa, a person from Alaska, that there's some, I don't know, it just rings as stupid to me. But the funny thing is, I mean, that's one of the paradoxes, right, of writing in fantasy, because in fantasy there is racism, because orcs are evil, or most orcs are anyway. So that's a difficult line to walk sometimes in the fantasy genre. But I wanted to explore it, and I wanted to ask questions. And, we've seen times where the hero himself, when Drizzt himself, realized that he was being a racist, and had to kind of slap himself upside the head and say, knock it off. I mean, at one point, he had made a vow where he would never kill another drow elf. Mm-hmm. But in the heat of battle, he's killing dwarves and elves and humans and all the rest. So what's so special about a drow elf? And, it was racism.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a fun thing to explore in this safer setting of fantasy, because it's a difficult subject. It's an important subject. So, I'm not gonna shy from it. When themes like that crop up in the books, I'm never gonna shy from them, because if I did, then what's the point of it all? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm writing these books to ask myself the big questions of the world, and the only way I'm gonna find the answers is if I do that honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, fantasy, especially role-playing game fantasy, I think unintentionally has been sort of racist till maybe the last 10 or 15 years or so, because you never could play. There's always the player races, and then there's the monster races, like the orcs, the dark elves, And only recently in role-playing games have you been able to play the other characters. And I don't even know, could you even play a Dark Elf back then in the game when you first created the character?
I think the first time they mentioned it was when the Fiend Folio came out. They said, here's some ways, and I'm not sure if that predated or postdated the Crystal Shot. It was right around that time. But yeah, we never had any in our group.
Now, the main book we're talking about, it's the third book in the Neverwinter saga. So what is Neverwinter, and what's the Neverwinter saga about?
Neverwinter is a city and region on the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms. And it's been featured in 2 computer games with a third one coming. The saga is really the story I wanted to tell in the saga. It would have been the same story whether or not Neverwinter was involved. Because it's really the story of, I have this Dark Elf character, and for most of his life, he was surrounded by people who are a lot like him. People of similar moral codes and values, people who would take an arrow for him without thinking twice about it. And now all of a sudden, as we've gone through the transition of the last series, he's surrounded by people who would probably pull him in front of an arrow aimed for them. And so the whole core of this series has been, it's like your friend who finds and falls in with the wrong crowd. And then you got to ask, the question that you want answered when that happens is he going to be able to bring this person or these people up to his level, or are they going to drag him down to theirs? And that's what this whole series has been about at its core, where I wanted to find that answer, and I didn't know the answer going in for this particular group of people. And the other part of the series is Neverwinter, the setting itself, where I was asked if I was going to be in that area, and since I was, would I be okay with kind of setting the stage for the next computer game that would be set in that area, which basically means blowing the place up. And, of course, I'm okay with that. That's the fun part of being a writer.
Yeah.
So I blew the place up.
Now, Charon's Claw is the name of the third book, and I know it has something to do with a sword, or his sword. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, one of the fun things about fantasy is having powerful weapons or artifacts. And Charon's Claw is an ancient Netherese sword. The Netherese are a race of beings who they take great pride in their magical artifacts and swords and weapons of all types. But this came into the hands of one of my heroes' enemies or acquaintances. At this point, I don't think I'd call them enemies anymore, or maybe they are. We'll see. Having these types of artifacts in fantasy is always a pleasure because, typically such a powerful sentient weapon can really mess with someone's head. That can just make the plot go all around in circles. So there's a lot of that in there, and what they find out in this book is that, it starts out as a revenge quest. There's a really bad guy, and it leads them to understand that there's a really bad thing going on around them that's going to be very hard to stop, and that involves the sword. So there it is.
Okay. Now, is this the last book in the Neverwinter saga, or is there going to be more?
Originally it was, but I already wrote and I already finished, actually, the next book, which is coming out next March, called The Last Threshold. And it fits so well with this storyline and really shows the surprising conclusions of the internal battles and the struggle that we decided to include that as well as the fourth book of the saga.
I'm also a writer, but mostly screenplays, and so I'm always curious about the different writers, their approaches to writing. How do you kind of plan out your books? Do you do a kind of a detailed outline? Do you just have a rough idea? How do you usually approach them before you start?
I do an outline. It's not extensive. It's usually 2 to 7 or 8 pages. And then I start writing and I pretty much throw it away because the characters take over. The characters start telling me what's coming next. And I find myself a lot of times writing books the same way other people read books, where sometimes I don't even know what's going to happen on the next page. And honestly, that's what makes it fun for me. And, I let the characters pretty much tell me where we're going.
Cool. I just wanted to ask this question because I read this book and of course it was kind of shocking in a way. Vector Prime for Star Wars New Jedi Order, and that's caused a little controversy because you killed off Chewbacca, and hopefully I didn't spoil anything, but it's been a few years.
Yeah, they got to know by now. Any Star Wars fans don't know that by now. That's their fault.
Yeah. Well, how did that come about, and how do you feel about that turn?
I was working for Del Rey Books at the time, and writing my Demon Wars books, and Del Rey got in this huge bidding war with Bantam. Was it Bantam? I think it was Bantam, where Del Rey won the rights to do the Star Wars adult fiction. And this was a really big deal because the rights had been tied up for a lot of years. But this was also right when they were announcing the 3 new movies. And I was one of Del Rey's authors, and they called me and they needed a book done fast, and they wanted me to be the one to write it. And was I interested? So, Del Rey had treated me really well by bringing me in after I had left TSR in the mid-'90s and the big fallout. And they were really letting me write the Demon Wars series, which I had always wanted to do. I was able to arrange it so that I would find time in my schedule. I had to talk to them, and I was back with Wizards of the Coast at this point, just to make sure they would delay my deadlines to let me do it, and Wizards accommodated me. I said, sure. So they told me the story arc that they were trying to do in the New Jedi Order, just the overall story arc, and I was supposed to, they showed me A to Z, and I was supposed to get them from A to B. So I went out and I wrote up an outline. I accepted the contract. I got the check, the advance check, put it in the bank, wrote up the outline, sent it in, and we were on a 3-way call with Lucasfilm, Del Rey, and myself, and they said, this is really great. This is just what we want, but didn't we tell you have to kill Chewbacca? And I won't tell you what I said next because it was very impolite. But I argued, didn't want to do it. Finally was convinced that they were doing it for the right reasons, and it really did come from on high. I mean, this had gotten the approval at the very highest level, if you can figure out who that is. And so I agreed, and I did it, and the death threats ensued, and the really visceral hatred from some people. It was more than I could have imagined. And how do I feel about it? It's probably the one thing I've done as a writer that I regret. I don't know that they should have done it with that character. But the Star Wars community is torn over it. That half the people love it, half the people hate it, or some percentage therein. But when I look back at it, it's like I just don't know that they should have gone there.
Yeah, it's tough to kill off one of those iconic characters like that. Let's talk about Demon Wars Saga a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How's that differ from Forgotten Realms and your other books?
Well, the biggest difference is that it's my world. So if I want to blow something up, I'll blow it up. If I want to kill off characters, I can kill off characters in the realms too, as long as they're my characters. But in Demon Wars, I'm a little more bloodthirsty. Don't get too attached to anyone. But it's a different. The Demon Wars world is really centers around the Abelican Church and magic gemstones that they control. And the moral center of the world is the church, and it's also the immoral center of the world. And that's the Demon Wars story in defining this world. Details a schism in the church, much like what the Catholic Church went through in our own world, except in our world it was about wealth. You had the Franciscans and the Benedictines, fighting over whether or not they should hoard the money and build these grand cathedrals, or whether they should live as peasants. And Demon Wars, same thing is going on, but with gemstones, where you have half the faction saying that the gemstones are the gifts of God. We're the Word of God, so we are the ones who should have all the gemstones. And these gemstones they're the source of almost all the magic in the world. And then you have another faction that's coming to the conclusion, well, wait a minute, if this one particular mineral or gemstone can heal disease, cure disease, or heal wounds, shouldn't we have it out at every town that we can get it out to, just to help alleviate suffering? Shouldn't we be sharing this kind of power? And that's really the backdrop for the world that is portrayed through an adventure story of 3 characters. And this 7-book series of Demon Wars was designed to create the world with that central conflict in mind. And then after I was done that, my goal was to go back there, which I have, and do more personal stories set in that world. So I went back and I wrote The Highwayman and the Saga of the First King. And The Highwayman just came out on graphic audio, by the way, and graphic audio is amazing. They call it a movie in your mind, and it really is. So if anyone's interested in that and you like audio books, I highly recommend it. But so I go back, I started doing The Highwayman, which takes place hundreds of years before Demon Wars, but shows you a lot of things that are relevant to the world you'll read about when you read The Demon Awakens and the 6 books after that. It's different than the realms in that it's more human-centered than the realms. You know, humans are one of many races in the realms that are prominent. In Demon Wars, the humans are much more dominant. The cultures are more human-like. Magic is less accessible and more dependent upon the gemstones, which have their own set of rules and how they work and who can access them and how they can access them. And I think it's a little more tougher in terms of if you like characters, they could get killed. I'm a little more heartless in Demon Wars. I say that, and yet I think that the most compassionate and easily the best book I've ever written in my life is Mortalis, which is the 4th book in the series that bridges the 2 trilogies.
Just out of curiosity, fantasy is getting much bigger now with the Game of Thrones, bigger in TV movies because of Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings.
And Harry Potter. And
Harry Potter, yes. And if they decided to make a Forgotten Realms TV show or movie or something like that, or maybe movie, what story or story arc that you wrote do you think would make a good movie?
In the realms, I'd love to see Homeland because it would be something so different. The Crystal Shard, all of the Drizzt books are episodic. I think you can pick up almost any of the Drizzt books and start the series with it, which was by design. I mean, I wrote them more along the lines of Sherlock Holmes or James Bond than Wheel of Time or A Song of Ice and Fire. Mm-hmm. So I think you could really jump in and do just about any of the books. Homeland's still one of my favorites, probably my favorite Drizzt book, and still one of my favorites I've ever done. And bringing that society to the screen, you could have such fun with the lighting that you would use, and it just might be something that people haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. So I'd like that.
What's the Homeland story about?
That's the origination story for Drizzt. It's where about the Dark Elf City and him being born and growing up in the Dark Elf City.
Mm-hmm. And the Hobbit's going to have 3 movies now. What do you think about that?
That's my favorite book.
The
Hobbit's my favorite book of all time. It's the book that changed my life. I loved what Peter Jackson did with the first 3 installments.
Do you think they might be going overkill with 3 movies, or you think that'll work?
They might be. I don't know. When I look at the first trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring was my favorite of the 3. It had the charm of Tolkien really burned into it. The beginning scenes in the Shire were just amazing. The way he used light in that opening scene, the forest, he just turned the filter up a little bit. I liked the second one less, and the third one less than that, even though I enjoyed them all. And it was because they went more towards CG and battles and blowing things up, which is cool, and you needed that. But I think I got a little too heavy on the CG as the series went along. That's my only criticism. I think Peter Jackson did a magnificent job. Oh, that, and you didn't have Glorfindel in it. You let Arwen have Glorfindel's role, and that bothered me because I love Glorfindel. Mm-hmm. In The Hobbit, I don't know what they're going to do to get 3 movies out of that. If they use 3 movies to tell more of that book, I'm going to love it. If they go into these side stories, like if we get one movie that's all about Tom Bombadil or something, I'm probably not going to like it as much. I think you could get 9 hours or 8.5 hours or 8 hours, whatever it turns out to be, of movie out of The Hobbit. With a logical break at Rivendell and another logical break maybe right before they go into the right when they first cross the Misty Mountains and come upon Beorn and all of that. So I think you could get 3 movies out of it, and if they do it that way and they're truer to the book, I'm going to love every minute of it.
How long does it take you to write a book?
Depends. I mean, the first Demon Wars book, I spent 6 months building the world before I ever started writing the book, and then I think it took me probably 8 months to write the book. So, that one alone was well over a year. But a Dark Elf book at this point where, I know the characters very well, then I know who they are, I know their motivations, almost all of them, and I'm only going to introduce a few new ones in each book. I can do one of those in probably 4 to 6 months. Probably 6.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your newest book or anything coming up?
Yeah, the new book comes out August 7th, and again, the next one in the series will be in March. That's called The Last Threshold. And also in October, the 3 books that I wrote with my son Gino, The Stone of Tomorrow, is coming out in an omnibus, so you can get all 3 in one. And after that, we're rolling along. I'm already well into the next book, Beyond the Last Threshold.
Wow.
So the road continues.
Are you going to be at Gen Con this year?
I will be at Gen Con and Dragon Con this year.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to be at
and Space City Con in Houston, and what's it called, HalCon, or I'll be in Halifax at a convention in October. Plus, I've got a book tour coming up and real soon, and so I'm going to be out on the West Coast. I'm going to be down in Texas, going to be back in Kentucky and Ohio, and ending up at Gen Con.
Oh, great. I'll be at Gen Con, so I'll have to stop by and say hi.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Have a good day.
Take care.
Well, thanks to RA Salvatore for agreeing to the interview, and his newest book, Charon's Claw. Charon's Claw hits bookshelves today.
So that's it for our 8th episode of GenreTainment.
But before we go, we just wanted to let you know about our web series, Reality on Demand. You can find it at realityondemandseries.com.
So that's it for today, folks, and join us next time on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Central. Auf Wiedersehen.
Adios.